This is good news. We can finally we can be bees. This isn't your world, but we can be bees. This is good news. You can be a bee. You'll live like a bee. A pet.
A pet?
A pet. Mark, this is good news. You'll live for 30 bees. 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 Bees.
It's insane!
Hollow Knight, the silly game about even sillier bugs with maybe the most depressing story I think I've ever seen in a game from this caliber. Hollow Knight, the game that will have you sinking hundreds of hours into it to find every last nook and cranny and still manage to make each minute feel like the best gaming experience of your whole life. Hollow Knight, the game that I never thought that I would love as much as I do until I booted up the game for the first time and heard probably one of the most pensive piano melodies that I've ever heard. There, I think I've said Hollow Knight enough times for the algorithm. There is so much to like about this game, almost too much to put into an intro, so I'll just throw out some of my favorites. The combat and movement in this game are perfectly crafted to intertwine with each other. The wide range of charms enable builds that you wouldn't even think were possible at a first glance. I felt a previously undiscovered sense of fascination with each new biome I got the pleasure of discovering, besides the Deepnest. Every time I felt like I had seen all there was to be seen, bam, there was another tool right around the corner to open up more of the map for me. I was utterly delighted with each new NPC I got to meet while exploring all of these lush biomes. Except for Zote, and that's probably why he has a whole achievement dedicated to leaving him to die specifically. The story kept me captivated, and it was actually one of the only games with a story that I just could not wait to learn more about after finally beating the game. And despite not knowing a lick of the story while I was playing, when I defeated the final boss for the first time, I transcended beyond this mortal plane. Upon defeating the Hollow Knight, I came to the realization that all of my efforts were futile, as it would all be undone in the blink of an eye, as my body lay there chained and waiting for the next poor soul to tempt fate. And when I defeated the Radiance, oh boy, I may as well have been God himself, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the only game that I have ever deliberately waited to consume content on until I was in a position to start script writing about it, and more importantly, once I was able to actually play through and beat the whole game to experience each song in the base soundtrack in its totality. For other games, this has never been a tall task to overcome, to be honest, because none of the games that I've covered so far have really been heavily story focused, thus not putting much of a dent on the quality of a song when listened outside of its story beat. Additionally, those songs are the same every time you listen to them, whether in-game or out of it. Hollow Knight breaks away from this formula with its vague but environmental storytelling and its dynamic compositions. You can sit and endlessly listen to the music on Spotify if you want, but as you'll notice, it feels comparatively stagnant in a way. All of the little flourishes and extra instruments and all that kind of stuff that exist in the game don't exist on the music on your phone. So while it is certainly still having a grip on your soul when you're listening to it, you're noticeably getting less than what you paid for. I can also confidently say that I've played my fair share of games with incredibly crafted soundtracks, but those were all games that were infinitely replayable, and that made it easy to force myself into the context necessary to get a feel for the soundtrack as it was intentionally designed to be listened to. But Hollow Knight is an entirely separate beast, requiring you to play through the entire game again to build up the story to the point of fighting whatever boss your heart desires if you want to so much as listen to the music on a slightly deeper level. If you want to not only listen to, but feel the track False Night, for example, well, you've got to restart your whole save, go back, and kill him again and again. If you want to not only hear, but feel the track Sealed Vessel, you have to bear witness to the heart-wrenching scene of killing one of your own again and again. All of this is to say that Hollow Knight's soundtrack really did a number on me, and the relevant story points are so salient in my mind that I can still at least kind of feel their impact while I'm listening to the corresponding music on my own personal time, but I would be a fraud if I didn't mention how much more emotional Sealed Vessel is while I'm watching the Hollow Knight stab themselves. Truly a maddening display. Hollow Knight's soundtrack has fundamentally altered my brain chemistry in a way that I almost can't put into words, but you all know me. I'm not one to back down from a challenge. So come along with me as I dive deep into the sonics of Hollow Knight's soundtrack and try to just wrap my head around this damn game. This is pretty epic because I spent about half of the time writing this script trying to figure out where this dastardly and mysterious theme came from. No, I didn't literally spend 50% of my script writing time trying to figure this out, but for the first half of this script, while writing it, I was also trying to figure out where this theme belonged. It sounds kind of mysterious at the beginning, but otherwise the remainder of the theme kind of sounds like a tavern-esque theme that I'd hear in the next Vermintide type game, albeit something a bit more cartoony and substantially less gory. This track is generally uplifting and epic in some capacity, which really adds to the energy of the trailer and probably encouraged at least like 15 to 20% more people to actually purchase the game. It also definitely helps people get a feel for the style of music that they can expect for one of the most influential Metroidvanias of the 21st century. So hats off to you, Christopher. As much as I personally won't be really listening to this theme often, I cannot deny how much power it probably had on potential buyers for the game, and it has firmly cemented you in the Hall of Legendary Video Game Composers. This song, much like many others in the game's soundtrack, gains increasingly more meaning the longer you play the game and the more you dive deep into the specific story elements. It starts off as a simple little tune, almost reflecting the knight's first time stumbling upon this town. It's a quaint little place, a bit dark, but they've got a few shopkeepers here. They've got this old guy here who insists on standing next to the bench but never actually sitting on it, and a completely demolished infrastructure that begs the question, how did this all happen? Or maybe, this is where I'm supposed to start my journey? As you continue to explore more nooks and crannies of this world, and you find your way back here every once in a while, you realize that this is basically all these humble citizens really have left. Most of them don't dare brave the caves because of the horrors that exist under the surface, and the ones that do often get themselves caught in precarious situations, unable to escape if it wasn't for your help. Once you get a good understanding of who is up here and why they're up here, it becomes abundantly clear that the inhabitants of Dirtmouth don't really have anywhere else to go, nor do they have the strength to do anything about the kingdom being on its final legs. And yet, despite all of that, these are still some of the most lovable characters in the entire game. Sure, they may never accompany you on your journeys into the caves, but they'll always be right here when you need them. This is almost like your de facto bug posse, in a sense. They give you the strength you need to trek further and further into the caves, and the final few chords of this song exude an uplifting nature to match that of the melancholic but otherwise uplifting characters that you'll become all too familiar with around this town. You know, a part of me always wants to feel a sense of fear when I listen to this song, probably because it's combined with the sight of what is basically an abandoned superhighway of the bug world, with the only inhabitants being corrupted bugs who have lost all sense of purpose, returning to their most primal forms. It's dark, there's thousands of corpses everywhere you look, and something about this music feels ancient because of the aforementioned abandonedness of everything. I always imagined this portion of the game to pan out like the knight being a tourist or something who had always heard tales of the insides of these caves, but it's only upon diving into them that they realize they are much different than they pictured them in their head. Of course, I know it isn't about what actually happens in the game, but just humor me here a little bit. The chords are soft but dense, and they help to add a sense of dormancy to the place you're exploring. The resolving chords really help establish a certain foggy sense of size. You can certainly imagine how large this world is while you're playing for the first time, but this song only gives you a faint glimpse of the true scale. For most listeners, there's still a sense of calmness that makes this song easy to listen to for the hours you'll spend running around this place, which is great because we can't have too many players quitting the game after only a few hours because the first track of the first real area of the game was just too tense. The long drawn-out strings are pushed to the very back of the composition, like they're calling out to the knight from years past. The twinkly arpeggiated harp provides the most amount of movement we hear in this song for the first half of it, which really adds to that notion that you are the only creature making progress in this world that has long since been abandoned by its king. I'm also legally obligated to make a comment about a particular section that I made in another song that I analyzed on another game where you dive deep into caves, but the plucked string or kalimba or synth or whatever the hell is going on on right now almost sounds like something I'd hear in Hollow Knight, which is strange because I've only played that game for like 3 hours. At the time when I said this, it probably had something to do with the strumming of the two instruments, but now I really think it has to do more with the general dissonance of the chords being played, or maybe it's just the vibe I get from the two, which is kind of the least helpful tie that I can really make to two songs from two completely different games. I can also tell that Christopher tried adding as many unique elements to each song as he could to encompass every unique sub-area within each main area, and for this song that element comes in the form of these tribal drums that you would otherwise only hear when fighting certain larger enemies. The final 40 seconds of the OST version of this track are weirdly insidious in a way, and I feel like I don't remember hearing this portion anywhere when actually playing the game. We have a deep drone, a weird augmented flute, some sparse tribal drums, and a percussion that sounds like a bunch of shells are being dropped on the ground. Very strange. I mentioned at the top of the video that you'd have to replay the first 25 to 30 minutes of this game if you wanted to get to the point of the False Knight to actually feel the emotions elicited by the track. And really, what I think I meant to say by that is that you'll have to go through the entire storyline of the maggot that inhabited the suit of armor, then come back and fight him again to feel his pain that caused him to don the suit of armor in the first place, only to fail at his duty and succumb to the infection. It's not like it's particularly important what actually happened to him directly, but understanding the state of the world right before you showed up paints a greater picture and actually makes the False Knight fight feel much more emotionally engaging than the first time you fight them. To me, it's kind of funny because the first time you run this fight, you're like, oh wow, this music kind of hits, this boss is going to be epic, and you think nothing of it, and then you learn more about the lore. This is gonna sound like one of the dumbest things I've ever said, and trust me, I've said a lot of dumb things, but after listening to a lot of music with synthesized strings, MIDI strings specifically, hearing someone actually put effort into making those strings sound as authentic as possible drives home something I've almost never touched on in the past. These strings have a level of human imperfection to them, almost like the string player themselves is being emotionally moved by the scene that they're currently scoring to. There's also an argument to be made that some of the tension in these songs comes from the grand mission that your character is setting out to complete, pushing anything that gets in the way to the side. Of course, each boss's theme is very much for them, but when we're talking about the False Knight, I'm not gonna let some stupid squishy bastard get in the way of me accomplishing my life's purpose, no matter how depressing that purpose might actually be. The last 25 seconds of this song contain a frankly silly descending piano line, which I only heard just minutes after remembering that the end of this boss fight ends with him collapsing and busting through the ground. And it strikes me as a very Tom and Jerry type scene, which is certainly a fitting end to a song for a boss fight that can, at first, kind of be construed as a bit of a joke. Oh wow, that's just lovely, isn't it? Why does shop music sound like spending? Why does water level music sound wet? These are all fantastic videos, but I'll give you an even stupider premise. Why does Greenpath's theme sound green? The plucked strings are soft and quaint in a way, almost like you woke up in the middle of a forest on a warm spring day. They also sound quite mythical in a way, much like if said hypothetical forest was also enchanted, and this is just starting to sound a little bit like a song vibe check that I've been requested to make in the past. The high notes that peak out a little bit more than the rest mimic that of a phenomenon of light shining through the small gaps created by naturally forming leaves, or I believe the Japanese term is like komorebi or something like that. The sustained violin playing the top line melody sounds a little bit old and worn on the low end, which is perfect for a place that is literally old, run down, and overgrown with foliage. In a way, Greenpath is your reprieve from the living mortuary of the forgotten Crossroads, as is the theme. It's calm, it's curious, and it's constructed so perfectly to breathe a sense of adventure into the player. I remember the genuine feeling of freedom and exploration that I had when I left the dreaded Crossroads after what felt like hours, only to discover the next area would be just lush and brimming with life. Truly a lovely change of pace, if you ask me. The low pizzicato strings are simple, and they add some much needed low end without bogging down the player. The call and response between the woodwinds and the bells create a very playful attitude, like you as the player discovering a little critter hiding in a patch of grass or something and playing a little game of cat and mouse with it. The song just generally has a slow burn. Again, it isn't meant to be too intense. It starts small and only marginally gets bigger as it goes on. Sure, there's some knights that you have to fight off who are preventing you from proceeding, but even the most intense battles in Greenpath are nothing more than child's play, and I mean that in the most endearing way. Everything in Greenpath is encouraging the knight to keep exploring and find its secrets that have been lost for quite some time. Near the end, we have a wobbly synth that sits in the background, and it's pretty reminiscent of the composition used in the Fog Canyon version of this theme, which I know was entirely intentional, with the core of Greenpath's theme still being present, but being literally washed out by the fog. It isn't as simple as just throwing a low-pass EQ on everything. It has to feel refracted in a way.
Drossiek Halimo.
Boy, Hornet sure is quick on her feet, just like her music, with those repetitive staccato strings, brief bass hits, and quick rhythm emphasizing her ability to execute a quick kill on unsuspecting targets. As Hornet herself says, she only took it easy on you because she thought you were a small fry, a weakling incapable of even contesting with her speed and technique. Although we all know it's because she would never hurt her beloved sibling. I mean, just look at our character. I don't mean this in a negative way when I say this, but I've never really felt much tension from this theme as it pertains to the contents of the Hornet boss fight itself, and maybe that's just the experience I've had so far when fighting bosses. As I've been talking about these themes, I've tried balancing its emotional impact on the player during their first playthrough, as well as through subsequent playthroughs when they get to learn a little bit more about these characters and these biomes, to illustrate that a song gains much more meaning once you understand even a little bit about this game's world. Hornet's theme feels much more like a theme for her character. The way she moves, the way she fights, the way she holds herself, more than it is a theme for her fight directly, or even the lore as it involves her as a character. And understanding that throughout both boss fights, she's basically just been testing the knight to see if they're even worthy of obtaining the king's brand gives her theme a little bit of professionalism. That said, there's also something heroic in main character energy feeling about certain portions of this song, which is a potentially sneaky way to allude to her being the protagonist of Silksong years before its announcement. Throughout most of the game, you'll find her around, whether she's giving you a run for your Geo, mourning the loss of her mother, or dismissing your feeble attempts at containing the Radiance. And every appearance of her feels important. Granted, so do the appearances of about 99% of the important bugs in this game, but once you come to the understanding how important it is that your character is even alive, you start to realize how important it is that she is also alive. Dear Diary, you will not believe the day I just had. First, I fell down this super big hole and ended up in an area with a ton of dead guys around me. There was this super big dude that I had to fight, which turned out to just be a big marshmallow in armor. And I even found a few grubs while I was out there. Then I stumbled upon a pretty green forest, and before I even had time to take in the scenery, this lady with a mask, kind of like mine, showed up and started throwing her nail at me. But of course, you know me. I took her down with relative ease. Then I gained this ability to dash and... Wait a minute, this isn't my diary, this is a map. I like to think of this theme as more of a reflection of the player than the knight, since we know the knight is basically incapable of having any kind of thought like that. Or at least I assume they are. The knight has their fun marking up their little map that they got from Conifer, which also begs the question of where the hell they even keep all these maps to begin with, and we the player just have to kind of sit there and complain about how hard this damn game is sometimes, piece together whatever lore bits we can, or just construct a new game plan to fight that boss that's killed us like 8 to 9 times. The second half of this song introduces what I can only describe as like a weird synth approximation of a violin. In the top line, it's playing sounds like a sexy guitar or something that I'd hear playing in the back of an emotional electronic song, almost evoking a feeling of wanting to sit on a bench alone in silence and cry to yourself over how hard life has been. May I introduce you to Greenpath Part 2, this time with less greenery and more mushrooms. I would say that I'm astonished by the amount of life to be found in a place self-described as a literal wasteland. However, you have to remember that this place is a home to an entire unique species, the Mushroom Clan, and seems to be busy and bustling as a result. Or I guess as busy and bustling as a clan plagued with infection can be. I cannot overstate how much I love these instruments. The plucked bass and the soft strings in the background, the clamshell percussion, the plucked strings playing the opening melody, and of course, the oboe playing a confused exploration style melody, kind of like 3 question marks given sound. Where Greenpath had a very heavy air of exploration and embodied the joy of wandering around, Fungal Wastes is comparatively much more calm, albeit a little bit hostile, and much more warm. Like, not warm in the traditional musical sense per se, but more like embodying the physical space of a warmer environment, almost to a suffocating degree. there is still a lot of beauty to be found in the serene minefield that are the Fungal Wastes. Like nature that is fascinating to look at, but from a safe distance. There's a lot of color, both in this environment and in the music, but you have to keep your distance or you'll discover something you'd wish you hadn't. Essentially what I'm saying is that if you want more on this, go look at the Greenpath section again. I also love the final couple of seconds of this track containing that long droning bass along with the harpsichord, which we will see in just a second why that's important. Is that a harpsichord I hear? Are we finally able to talk about a harpsichord being used in a song after over a year since the mention of Castlevania and Ultrakill? Now, of course I'm joking, but I would be remiss to mention how harpsichords, despite their kind of silly sound, actually do shockingly well at depicting a court of royalty, albeit one from a very non-seriously depicted time period in human history. And the Mantis Lords are the closest living thing to royalty that you'll actually see in modern-day Hallownest. The Mantis Lords have a theme similar to that of Hornet, in a sense that the speed and quick release of all the instruments match very closely to their fighting style. They'll come onto the screen quick, they'll attack quick, and then they'll be off the screen before you can even take time to analyze what they just did to you. I know I'm jumping back and forth a little bit here, but at the 53-second mark of this song, the top line strings sound an awful lot like this hyper-specific melody that plays in, get ready for it, the underground sub-area portion of the vampire's castle in the Animaniacs Sega Genesis game. Some call it too niche, and I say, yeah, you're right. I know I haven't mentioned basically anything on odd time signatures in this game so far despite the abundance of them, but this one actually feels kind of important to me. The Mantis Lords are made up of 3 sisters and 1 traitor who no longer fights beside them. So much like a 3-4 time signature can represent a vital piece of oneself going missing, a 3-4 time signature in this context, to me, represents the loss of the 4th piece of the puzzle. The last detail has nothing to do with the music, but I can still say that one of the coolest aura moments of this entire game is defeating the Mantis Lords and having everyone in the Mantis tribe or Mantis village or whatever decide that you're valiant enough to just leave you alone. This is easily one of the worst areas I've ever explored in a video game ever. For the record, it's not that I think the area is actually poorly designed, although these pitfall traps, while clever, are annoying as hell, and I think its inclusion in the game is overall a good thing. But as a person who came into this game knowing it was all about bugs, I wasn't expecting spiders to be on that list of bugs, and I vividly remember telling myself, this is the worst area in the game. Until of course I got to the Beast's Den and went, oh no, this is even worse. A lot of it comes down to small things, like the spiders appearing from the background into the foreground, the small eggs that you break that release a ton of spiders beneath your feet, and the noises that the spiders themselves make. But the music is definitely not helping, with its tremolo strings, no actual melody, no discernible chords, and a variety of sounds that barely qualify as instruments. It's all kind of just unsettling noise. And this is all without even mentioning the horn that sounds like a beast larger than someone of our size can fathom, which always makes me think something larger than life is going to appear in these claustrophobic caves and tear my shade apart atom by atom. While all of this comes off as shit-talking, I would personally rather have this track exist in the game than not. Every song in a game is meant to make you feel something, and Deepnest's theme heavily encourages you to spend as little time in here as possible, which, while bad for exploration, is great for ambiance. I have to stress that a song composed for an area like this hellhole deserves to be unsettling, and frankly warrants people not liking it. Something like a complete and utter destruction of the senses, while abrasive and very controversial, is at the very least fast-paced enough and high energy to accompany the final room of the level it plays on, and subsequently it at least gives it some appeal. The theme for the Deepnest makes players deeply uncomfortable in the best way possible. And fuck this boss. I'll admit it was genuinely so clever seeing like a picture-perfect version of myself walking in these caves and choosing to follow them because I thought maybe we could frolic in the fields for the rest of Hallownest's pathetic existence like two non-binary lovers, only to see him transform into this amalgamation of pitch blackness and infection. It also makes me wonder why he's even pitch black if he's not made out of void according to the wiki, but I don't really care that much. I love that all of the instrumentation for this theme is plucky, and I do mean everything. The percussion, strings, bass, not quite the other strings that play the unsettling portion of his theme, but even those strings don't play for very long, so it feels very rushed in a sense. Nothing is sustained for very long, which almost mimics that of a first-time player panicking with every move that Nosk makes, increasing their likelihood of messing something up and dying. I also love the tribal percussion because it really showcases how primal he feels to fight against. Sure, he's a being of some level of higher power, being able to peer into people's dreams, but he's still savage in a way. I mean, for God's sake, he's hanging his victims up by strings in the ceiling like a cult would do. The strings are also very slightly vibrato, which makes them feel unstable, and they eventually have stacking chords that sound super abrasive, like a bunch of spiders trying to crawl into your ear, and I deeply apologize for putting that image into your head. Honestly, most of the horror factor in Nosk's fight is reserved for the first time you see him unbreak his joints to reveal his true form, but I do love the more subtle musical nods that make his theme feel uneasy, because he is still in one of the most tense areas of the game and seems to have had a long-lasting impression on players for how fucking freaky he is. I do not speak lightly when I say that the City of Tears might have the most beautiful composition of any video game soundtrack I've ever reviewed. Take away all the lore implications of something like The Kingdom's Edge, take away all of the preconceived ideas that are implanted in your head when you hear something like The Resting Grounds. Pound for pound, the City of Tears just might be the most beautifully constructed piece in all of Hollow Knight, in no small part thanks to a lot of things, starting with the incredible vocal performance by Emilia Jones. I will admit that the lore behind the songstress makes her singing just that much more beautiful and that much more somber, knowing that she may have been one of the few shining beacons left in the City of Tears, but I still find her range and control and technicality incredibly impressive. I find her overall performance to just be very moving, and I held all of these opinions the first time that I heard her portion of this song in-game, even when I didn't have any of the lore to clue me in. The violin takes the main stage, playing the same melody later in the song, and it helped me understand another thing that I really enjoy about Christopher's use of these instruments. I've mentioned once before the human perfection of the performance, but now I'm solely focused on the imperfection of the instrument itself. It sounds vintage in the same way the strings of previous songs sounded vintage, only this time the violin may be stricken with a little bit of water damage. There's also a bowing string set in the background playing a 4/3 polymeter, which is something that I had to spend like 45 minutes reading and learning about to make sure that I had the correct definition. I just love the way that this track starts off somber and tight-knit, only to expand to many more instruments and many more voices in the form of a choir. It all sounds like a soul piano player playing their heart out in the middle of the town and singing the most beautiful melody I've ever heard, and then other members in the town join in to express a previously buried memory of the town's history. But at the end of the day, this is still the City of Tears. Everything will be washed away eventually, and you'll be left with only a fading memory, a fading melody. A melody that sounds awfully familiar, but sinister in a way. The pipe organ makes its return to bastardize the beautiful theme of the City of Tears. It's perverse and haunting, and it continues the trend of frightening me. With every new addition to the pipe organ subcategory of video game songs, I become ever more fearful of what I have to bear witness to. I've become desensitized to an angel executing divine justice against a robot responsible for dismantling the upper layers of hell itself. I've come to terms with the role that I play in a world on the brink of collapse, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that await me in the soul sanctum. A bastardization of the calming melody of the former greatest city in all of Hallownest, the bastardization of the very science you seeked to use for good. You dared to challenge the very limits of the body, and look at where it got you. Now I see why they call you mistakes. You were foolish to meddle with such a powerful force of which you knew nothing about. I don't like how much the first half of this song sounds like a ceremony of death. I can't in good faith say it puts me in a good head state, but I cannot deny the evidence. This song is truly perfect at conveying how horrible of a situation this place is in, and the stinger chord really seals the deal. You have stumbled upon what is essentially a cult ritual run by a group infected with Radiance and still insisting that they are in any position to be fucking with the soul. After you've taken in all of the atrocities that have occurred in this wing of the city, the song takes a swift turn, with a great introduction to the master behind this operation. Behold the power of a man who has obtained power beyond comprehension, but at a cost that is greater than any one bug can bear. The long droning choir and horns do an incredible job at portraying how brooding the Soul Master is. A bug who was able to harness so much soul that it literally gave him powers, albeit at the cost of his sanity. Small price to pay, I guess, because he was gonna die no matter what. There's a section about 3 minutes into the song with these stabbing low horns in a 5-count manner, and while I don't know rhythmically what it's meant to sync up with, it does make the song feel incredibly off-kilter, which could just be another subtle way to portray how fucked up this guy is in the grand scheme of things. would also like to quickly throw in that learning about the Soul Sanctum's violations of the Bug Geneva Convention feels awfully similar to what Alphys was doing in Undertale, which also has an incredibly depressing story and incredibly well-written songs, so I'll gladly accept the meddling of the scholars just so that I can be hella dramatic in my writing and also find small reasons to mention other incredibly well-written games. From dealing with bugs who are trying to play God, which is already a very terrifying premise, to water pipes that are crawling with bugs that would even make the sapient bugs of Hallownest shudder. The theme of the Royal Waterways almost sounds like it was a place that used to have life and has now gone extinct, when obviously in-game it's actually the exact opposite. The solo cello gives off this air of abandonment, much like a lot of the other themes in this game do, which I guess would make sense given the context of this whole game, but technically, if the Royal Waterways were fully functioning as they were supposed to in a fully functioning bug society, then it would be incredibly clean and you'd never really have much to speak of. You'd just show up, be like, hey, nice pipes, and then leave because the citizens of Hallownest still have clean drinking water or something. As the place exists in-game, however, it's horribly cramped, full of trash so questionable that it makes you wonder both how someone managed to flush away 4 entire iron benches, and also why they choose to do so, and it's ironically probably the dirtiest place in the entire game. The solo cello literally reverberating throughout the pipes of the waterways gives the impression that it's completely barren in here, almost as if the piece was composed for a different version of the waterways. Now, they're anything but barren, and in fact, we probably have more enemies per square inch in this area than almost any other area in the game, just due to how quickly the fluke are able to reproduce, how many eggs are laid, and just the sheer quantity of little bastards and enemies that split into 2 enemies when you kill them. Within the context of the game, the solo cello is both emotional and incredibly tense. You as the player know there will be enemies here, but you never know what they are or where they will be. It's horrific in a certain sense because the worms that crawl around in here are so twisted and deformed, and the emotional undertone of the cello adds the additional context that really puts into perspective how far this great kingdom has fallen. And also, allegedly, the 11-second mark of this song uses the Pale King's leitmotif, which is just another subtle way to show how badly this kingdom has turned to shit after his reign, whether intentionally or not.
Rumas!
And in maybe the most dramatic tone shift in this game, we switch from a deceptively busy waterway swarming with abominations to a well-respected knight of the Old Kingdom who plays with his shit all day. I didn't think this game could get any weirder. The Dung Defender, which also happens to be a dung beetle, very funny, is maybe one of the more deceptively depressing characters to fight in this game, although you would never really be the wiser just by listening to his theme. His theme is incredibly upbeat, it's incredibly heroic, and it utilizes a lot of generic instruments that would play in some cheesy superhero children's movie or something. A lot of these sections have ascending superhero-like chord progressions, the bass likes to sit on the root note a lot, and as a result, there really is no tension, which is maybe a first and only for this series. He doesn't even die when you defeat him. And you can do that like 6 goddamn times. Granted, 5 of those are in his dreams, but the point is that being one of the great knights seems to make him infallible to your efforts. He compliments you on your great fighting skills, and then he just goes on about his day. Yet despite all of this positive talk of the Dung Defender, I still feel a great sadness for the character simply due to his own ignorance. He has literally no idea what's happened to any of the other previous Great Knights of the Kingdom. And in fact, he thinks they're still all alive and that one day they will reunite and Hallownest will be whole again. His entire theme almost feels like narrative dissonance in a way, where it is incredibly upbeat and heroic, and yet you just know how this is all going to end for him. His upbeat and heroic theme is not a facade he puts on. He's genuinely a nice person who has high hopes for you and high hopes for the kingdom, and yet you can't help but feel bad for him at least a little bit. I really don't want to be around once he learns of the fate of his fallen partners. Damn it, everything sounds abandoned. Even the place with hundreds of continuously working bugs. Everything sounds abandoned. Even with the continually functioning crystal carving engine, everything sounds sparse and empty. It's almost like these songs were written for an older version of the areas than the actual time period specific version of the area that we are playing in. It's almost like we're perpetually hearing the song as it reverberates through the empty portions of this cave, traveling directly through and being produced by the very crystals that surround us. It's almost like despite all of the hardworking bugs in these mines, there's still something empty feeling about this place and the track. And we know it's not the population because you can see how many bugs are still wandering around here. And just look at how empty they all are. Look at how empty they all look. Look at how soulless all of them appear. Look at how mind-numbing and useless their work is. Look at how little they're amounting to anything. It's almost like the bugs themselves are hollow shells of their former selves, and thus the busy and bustling crystal mines are nothing more than an operation that is doomed to run forever. No end in sight, no use for their labor, and yet they still keep doing it. In a cave defined entirely by the pretty pink crystals that line the walls, it's no shock that you're hearing bells, tonal percussion, and other instruments that generally sound glassy. Few long sustained notes to speak of, with any sustained sound coming from the long reverbed tails to really sell the vibe of being in a cave. Shocker. In a way, many of the sounds come together to feel tribal. Sure, many of these instruments are still not fully organic sounding, but they get kind of close, and the thumping drum loop is definitely playing a big part in that feeling. Why does snow level music sound cold breaks down exactly what its name entails. And I find a lot of the cold but not Christmassy characteristics described in that video can also be perfectly replicated and seen here. The glassy instruments literally sound like ice. The instruments are playing desolate melodies, but unlike a lot of wintry music, this song maintains a lot of low frequencies. Not specifically low tones, but low frequencies. We aren't filtering out all of the low frequencies to achieve a bright and twinkly sound. We're trying to convey a feeling of emptiness in a crystal cave, with a heavy emphasis on the cave elements. This is not a bright place. Okay, it literally is because of all the light coming off the crystals, but It isn't a welcoming light, it isn't friendly light, it's light harvested by slave bugs, for crying out loud. Slave bugs who ultimately achieve nothing for the many years that they've spent in these caves, and yet they completely lack the capacity to stop doing it. In this designation of Hallownest, you either die from the harsh conditions in the cave, or the infection takes a hold of you, which might just be worse than death. This track is a bit of a head scratcher all around, because at first I struggled to pin down exactly where it belonged, which isn't my fault because it feels like it plays in some of the most arbitrary set of bosses in the entire game. It plays during one of the Godhome fights with the Vengefly King, the regular fight with the Gruzmother, specifically the Brooding Moloch in the Crossroads, fucking Umu of all bosses, and the Collector, although that last one is pretty cool because it takes the original theme and distorts it to match with the kind of freaky nature of the Collector. The other strange thing about this theme is that the intervals being played by the violin at the beginning just don't feel like they resolve very well, especially not for a theme that is supposed to be played while you are fighting what are essentially just larger versions of things that you've killed hundreds of times. The theme itself kind of feels unsure, as if the battle is in fact not decisive. One thing I was not expecting to see in any of this music was variable time signatures, where you can hear a 4/4 to 5/4 back and forth phrasing, which is also mimicked by the drums. And if you've seen any of my other previous work, then you know that I'm a sucker for this kind of parallel phrasing. There's also a few fun instruments sprinkled throughout this portion, with an Asian-style plucked instrument that I definitely would not be able to name if you put a gun to my head, and a piano playing familiar stab chords. After that portion, we have an extended portion of the 4/4 time signature again, which sounds a bit more urgent, with us entirely lacking that fifth measure, and coincidentally, that's also the portion with a desperate-sounding string melody, before jumping right back into the 5/4 portion, continuing to build tension with the string melody from before, which has continuously risen a few registers over the course of the song. Given the random nature of where this theme plays, I can only naturally assume that this increase in pitch is to simulate the rising anxiety of the player only being on 1 or 2 health in the early game while fighting some of these bosses. Or maybe I just said that so that I could extend the runtime of this video, so I just pulled something out of my ass. But that's for me to know and for you to assume of me in the comments. Maybe it's just because the Queen's Garden looks like an even more fleshed out version of Greenpath, but that in combination with the heavy reverb on the plucked strings makes me imagine Queen's Garden as one of the only places in Hollow Knight that could actually be 3-dimensional. Of course I know every area in the game is technically 3-dimensional since we can see all the background elements, but the character of the reverb on the harp makes it sound like it's bouncing around in a 3D space. The harp and high tempo of this track almost conveys a certain sense of urgency to me, which I initially would have attributed to the fact that it's one of the areas closer to the end of the game, but there is a lot of calmness to be found in this track, which is kind of the point. I mean, these gardens were meant to be a place of solitude. They were annexed for the White Lady, after all. It's also been brought to my attention that due to the nature of the harp, it's actually an incredibly technically hard track to actually do because of harmony stacking and all this other random crap that you can easily achieve on something like a piano, but you cannot do on a harp. I don't know anything about the harp, but it being complex is just a point for this song. On top of the calmness and the urgency that I may have just made up, this theme also has a subtle undertone of pensiveness and regret, because one of the most salient features in this area is the White Lady basically chaining herself at the bottom of the gardens as a bit of a penance for her actions in sacrificing hundreds, maybe even thousands of her own children to take part in a war that never really needed to happen. actions have also led to the isolation of the Mantis tribe, so seeing the Mantis traders take refuge in this place is almost a bit of karmic irony in a sense. I think a lot of the tension from this track comes from the byproducts of her complacency that she now has to live with. She still has a greater purpose that she has to serve since she didn't die like her bitch-ass husband, but that makes every reminder of her failures sting that much more. I don't want mom and dad fighting over whose motif this belongs to, but I do find it fascinating that both the Pale King and the White Lady themes both use this motif in it. I guess because they both share it, it's basically just a theme for royalty of higher beings, if you will. I appreciate the fact that the White Lady version of this theme is played entirely by the harp, which both ties in with the main instrument played in the theme for her gardens, and ties it into her general timid nature and general sanctity. I'll admit I was a little intimidated the first time I stumbled into this little hole she put herself in, but the sight of her character and hearing this theme playing brought a sense of calmness to me. And I would say for the night, but by this point in the game, I don't know if they actually realize that that's their mom. I'll speak more on the White Palace theme when I actually get to it, but for right now, I'll just say I really enjoy how tavern-y the theme sounds. It's probably just due to the plucked instrument, but that obviously changes the context in which this motif is solidified in people's minds. The White Palace theme is much more heroic and epic in a way, so reframing it in this mother to non-binary child sort of way gives this a whole new meaning. It's meant to be soft so that you, as one of the shades, don't feel intimidated by being down here. I also just really enjoy the fairy-like flourish that plays about a minute into the song because it makes your encounters with the White Lady feel a bit more magical and surreal. Hearing the low swell accompany the appearance of a creature who looks just like you, but broken and dormant, only being able to act and fight as a result of the infection, may just be on par with the unease of seeing Nosk for the first time. The ostinato pattern of the low strings has this sort of marching rhythm to it, which pairs really well with one of the many hundreds of vessels that were birthed for the sole purpose of fighting back against the Radiance, done basically entirely in vain. This vessel specifically dared to dream, managed to parkour their way out of the abyss, and ultimately ended up getting caught in a scuffle against the very thing that they were birthed to suppress. Once again, karmic irony. The violin plays these long phrases that often have many moments of silence, and their character represents the vessel being physically incapable of fighting back against someone who has gained as much power as the knight has. Their body is tired, but the infection forces them to fight on despite how desperately they want to be laid to rest. The higher register strings add a bit of emotional tension that is likely not actually felt by the knight themselves, but like, we can't just ignore the fact that you're basically killing one of your siblings, right? Like, surely that must strike a nerve on some primal level. There's also something about the character of the strings that, to me, sounds like betrayal. You didn't do anything wrong, the broken vessel didn't do anything wrong, and yet it is void versus light. You are doing all you were created to do, and they are doing all that they are capable of doing, and that is a very depressing situation to find yourself in. This music sounds like the most beautiful form of abandonment you can think of. This place is desolate in a completely unique way compared to all others. Kingdom's Edge exists, well, on the edge of the kingdom, which is basically only important because this is where the Pale King decided to molt and take it upon himself to become the king of Hallownest, and, well, we see how that went for all parties involved. Hallownest is a rich colony with a rich history, and this music does an incredible job at putting that richness into symphonics. You get to learn a lot about this little world while you're exploring. You get to learn a lot about the people who inhabit it, and the events that ultimately led to your existence. But understanding why this kingdom fell into ruins, as well as the main perpetrator of its collapse, is a weight that I can't say I was ready to bear when I booted up this game for the first time. The Kingdom's Edge, in a way, feels like a retelling of the story of the Pale King, and it wasn't until right now that I pieced together the somberness of this piece. The Pale King, frankly, came in here and fucked everything up. And then fucked up things even harder while trying to make his infinite army of little dudes. Hallownest would not be in the state that it's in if it were not for the meddlings of the Pale King, and now I have to explore around this kingdom and clean up his mess while nearly every sapient bug wants me dead. Do they know I'm the genderless child of the Pale King? Do they know that I'm here to undo all the damage he's caused? In this house, we pay respect to the dead by having really good things to say about the music that plays at their graveyard. It consists of exactly two elements: some very ambient strings that basically just act as a soundscape in the background, occasionally being tonal enough to facilitate a feeling, but otherwise just being noise to fill out the space, and an incredible 12/8 piano playing a soft and somber melody. I actually studied the MIDI for this song a little bit, and what I found is, well, basically exactly what you can find if you just fucking listen to the piece, which is made even easier by the fact that with one major exception, there are no enemies that you would need to be focusing on fighting instead of just listening to the song. The first thing I noticed was that the main arpeggio being played is in a constant descending pattern, which was actually a lot easier to visually see because apparently I was too engulfed by the prettiness factor to actually notice this. The descending line achieves two really great things. The first being a bit of a metaphor for the collapse of the kingdom after the infection fucking got everyone, with no one really being in an optimal physical condition to continue to visit the graves of those they cared for, and the second is that it's able to resolve into the root chord of the song to be able to loop on itself really well. I was once told by a friend of mine that 3/4 music can achieve this feeling of being trapped in a loop in a sense, which I had never fully come to understand or actually feel until now. And in the context of the Spirit Glades, it almost feels like it's representing the cyclical nature of death in a way, especially in a world that is suffering under the weight and consequences of a monarch. There is a bit of a B section in this song with some slightly more hopeful sounding piano, but in my opinion, death in this dying kingdom is a much more somber experience than what can be perceived as a celebration of life here in the real world. I've thrown the word surreal around a couple of times in this video, and given the richness and depth of the Hollow Knight world, I think most of them are justified in gameplay. But I want you to try and imagine for a second being in this world from the perspective of the knight at this point in the game. Up until now, we've been operating mostly within reality, albeit a reality that follows different rules from our reality, but still reality as it pertains to the bug world. Now imagine that you obtain this mysterious glowing nail that Grammy Moth gave to you. You swing on some dead guy's corpse, and then suddenly you're transported to a world that exists in stasis. Hallownest. You're surrounded on all sides by dark clouds. You have one central room in the middle of a floating abyss. And most importantly, you can't die, but you seemingly can still kill here. It's a bit of a paradox in a way. There's not much of a tonal center. A lot of the instruments are airy and bright. There's no rhythm to speak of. And you usually have exactly one salient musical line that will only come up every once in a while. That one salient musical line being the solo violin, which has a bit of a certain movie score quality to it. Something that would play while the main character looks off onto the Scottish Highlands while reminiscing on all of the lovely memories he had with his best friend or his partner or whoever you want it to be in this scenario. The stronger bugs of Hallownest seem to have a second life whenever they are slain, almost like they were putting on an outer shell every time they interacted with someone in the real world, and eventually that shell became them, with the dream nail being the only way to truly see what was underneath. In a world full of shit-throwing bugs, creatures trying to play God, and all of the other random things that go on in this world, truly the strangest thing is being able to peer behind the mask of everybody else, and finding out that there may be more to this world than just the kingdom of Hallownest. The Council of the Dream World has sounded off the alarms. They've been made aware of your presence, and now everything they've got has been sent your way to stop you. The only caveat? For some reason, they all exist in their own little palaces, so you never really have to fight any of them at the same time. You just have to give them the hands in a nail-to-nail style combat. One-on-one, no items, Dream Realm only. To be honest with you, a lot of this song sounds like something that would play in a castle full of bugs, as if it was about to be pillaged by another warring faction, and they're prepping the troops to take on the bloodiest battle in modern bug history. Maybe I'm just misremembering the dream battles, but I don't really remember this being the song that played when you fought most of the harder versions of bosses that you already took on. But then again, I may also just be forgetting this song exists entirely because I was too busy malding because I'm bad at Hollow Knight or something. And then I looked it up and found out that this theme just plays during the dream boss fights with the warriors, not any of the regular old dream fights, so whoops. I knew that this song sounded a lot more hype and tense in the sense that millions of bugs may die during this battle, but I didn't realize that the reason for that is likely because you're fighting some of the stronger beings in this world. Definitely nothing crazy, but the warriors are kind of a big deal, so the fact that this entire subset of enemies gets their own theme is really cool. Like, I'm just this small little dude running around trying to figure out the meaning behind my entire life, and you mean to tell me that I'm fighting warlords when this music plays? Hell fucking yeah. Yes, I know they're not actually warlords, but just play along with me here. This palace is just so neat, but I feel out of place. I feel like I completely missed something. Why was this place hidden from me for so long? Why is this palace only accessible through the dream realm? Did it collapse? How the hell did the king manage to just up and leave with an entire palace? About half of what I said about the White Lady's theme applies here, but everything is cranked up by like 3 or 4 points. The harp is still very angelic, because that's what the harp just is. It's very indicative of royalty, it's very pristine sounding, but everything is larger than before. Much larger than before. The White Lady's theme is small and neatly put together. The White Palace theme contains cellos, flutes, additional harp tracks, and long sustained strings. It has its moments of being a larger-than-life composition to represent the royalty housed in this place, and the people who directly served under the king and queen, and the sins that paint these walls. This music is such a joy to listen to, even with it being combined with the challenge of the Path of Pain, because it feels floaty with its heavy use of rubato, and it feels deep and complex, even if you don't know why it feels deep and complex yet. But the palace theme is still a place that is heavily associated with the king, and is tainted in many of our minds as a result. This track is sinister at times, sprinkled with light violins in the background, and using some rather dark chords. It has moments of feeling pensive, and making you question basically everything that I said at the top. What the hell is this place? Where did it go? And more importantly, where is the king? I like to think that after you obtain the first half of the King's Soul, your character just knows where they have to go to obtain the other half, what they'll have to endure in order to obtain it, and ultimately what sacrifices they'll have to make in order to right the wrongs of their creator. And the final portion of this song is really what makes me feel like that. Whether I'm right or wrong could spark a debate lasting an entire millennium, but I'm just gonna use the cop-out excuse of, well, that's what I feel and it's all subjective, so I can't possibly be wrong. The White Palace theme is great, and the general white motif as it's presented in the White Palace theme is incredible from a gameplay perspective because it's incredibly uplifting and it literally encourages you as the player to go through the entirety of the track of the Path of Pain, no matter how annoying it can be, just so that you can figure out what's at the end of the tunnel. You got to this White Palace, this incredible theme starts playing, and then you think to yourself, I have got to know what's at the end of this palace, and I don't care how hard the Path of Pain is to get there. And finally, the music that I've been alluding to for basically the entire episode. The song that both moved me beyond comprehension, beyond what I can put into words in a YouTube video, and the boss fight that reaffirmed my comparisons between this game and Undertale. The haunting screeches in the background are unnerving and make the traversal of this empty black void feel more intense than some of the boss fights present in this game. I've talked at length about the knight's purpose in this whole game, and now that we're here, I'm kind of nervous to move forward. I don't know if I'm ready to fight the Hollow Knight. I don't know if I'm ready to take charge in securing Hallownest's salvation for another who knows how long. What if I'm not fit to fill the role? What if I'm not strong enough? What if... That blood-curdling scream, combined with these incredibly emotional string stabs, is something I truly can say I was not prepared for. This fight felt a lot easier to me than I think it may have for some, because I came into this game thinking that I wouldn't be able to play on my save after I was done fighting the Hollow Knight, so I ran through as much of the game as I could find. I had put 27 hours into the game and an 80% completion rate before I fought the Hollow Knight for the first time. But I think all that buildup made the fight even more memorable for me because I wasn't focused on the challenge. I didn't need the fight to be hard because the song that played here rewired my brain chemistry in a way that is the reason this video fucking exists. The juxtaposition of the agile strings and the big, sparse, half-note plucked strings and percussion really highlights the movement of the two characters in this fight. Sure, the Hollow Knight was built to fight in case they absolutely had to, but even they can't match with my sheer speed and technique. The other great thing about the agile strings is that they're playing a descending line, and they once again subtly represent the downfall of the kingdom and hint at the potential of what is to happen to this kingdom should something go awry in this fight. No matter what happens, the kingdom will feel the weight of this fight for the foreseeable future. Someone has to die. Will it be the Hollow Knight, or will it be me? Will the savior of this kingdom be the one to fall and cause Hallownest to fall into ruins, or will I perish, leaving the Radiance-infested shell of a god to wreak havoc on this world and rampage through it until nothing is left but ash and dust? This portion of the song is much more pared down, much more sorrow, and frankly, I don't like what it's doing to me emotionally. Of course, I love this song to death, but something about this song felt narratively dissonant in a way. It made me feel like I should actually have remorse for this character in some capacity, and not having a clear motive or understanding of them at the beginning made that a difficult pill to try and swallow. For every other boss, I just sort of killed them or defeated them and moved on. I think a part of me knew that these were kings and queens and gods and small people and sometimes important people, but I just didn't care what happened to them. I think I saw them as merely obstacles in the way of whatever my end goal was, or whatever I thought my end goal was when I first started playing. At the beginning, I didn't know anything about the Radiance, so I never understood the ultimate goal of the Hollow Knight. I never thought I would feel so bad for a final boss of a video game until these frankly depressing strings started playing, and I had to watch as one of my own stabbed themselves, trying to rid themselves of the infection, or maybe being literally controlled by it. It was at this moment that I realized how heavy this fight would weigh on my conscience. I never wanted the Hollow Knight to die. I didn't think they deserved it. They didn't deserve to serve as the vessel for the king's twisted attempt at controlling a force that he didn't understand. They didn't deserve to fight in the king's war against the Radiance, to be subject to the pain that it would cause them. They didn't deserve to have the weight of the entire kingdom placed on their shoulders, only to have said kingdom fall because the king had created an imperfect vessel. The Hollow Knight did not deserve to be punished for the wrongdoings of the cowardly king, for his failure to protect the kingdom he chose to command. They didn't deserve to be met with the fate of my nail. If God had wanted the Hollow Knight to live, then he would not have created me. This track is an excellent introduction to both the Radiance herself, as well as the general sound palette of the DLC tracks, which we will be exploring in a future episode. The bravado of it all is a lovely change of pace from the ambient music we've become all too familiar with throughout our collective thousands of hours on this game. The horns, the toms, the choir, it's also beautiful and bombastic in a way that feels shockingly fitting for a fight like this one. The Radiance has been fucking up everything in this world for a long time, and it feels like now is a great time to get some much-deserved revenge on her for tormenting this kingdom for an untold amount of time, maybe even other kingdoms that we aren't aware of. That said, this boss fight actually has a lot of challenging aspects to it, with precise platforming being a staple of the second half of the fight, the many different attacks that keep you both on your feet and off the ground, and even the more meta stuff like the majority of her attacks dealing 2 damage each, which can easily snowball you into another death if you dare heal at the wrong time. If you listen closely at the 115 mark, I think you can also hear the Radiance scream in the background. Which is just one of the coolest sounds to come out of this game. I also need to bring up the horns again because I think they do what other staple instruments in this soundtrack can't do. Make a fight feel larger than life. There is something so appropriate about big, loud, in-your-face horns paired with the creature who is responsible for the two main warring forces that make up most of this game's issues. So I feel like the knight would probably have some primal and instinctual reason to want to beat the Radiance to a pulp, and if the Radiance knows who I am, then she should have a good reason to want me dead as well. This fight is a battle of two titans, but we all know that I come out on top here, so I'll give them the benefit of having this track all to themselves. Yes, I know this track plays at the beginning of the game, but I think the solo piano with its generally somber nature doesn't quite hit as hard when you haven't been put back to the main menu after killing a tortured soul or a god older than the kingdom of Hallownest itself. Probably. The first time you load up this game, when you hear this little song, you're just like, oh, damn, this piano is beautiful, but isn't it a bit soft, even for a title screen theme? And then you play your fair share of a generous, we'll say 30 hours, and hit the 1,000-yard stare screen while this lovely little gem plays. You deal with the emotionally ripping scene and emotionally ripping theme of the sealed vessel while they're ripping themselves apart. You almost feel like you're putting down an old dog when you get to the end of that fight. And then you realize this whole game is cyclical. You realize that in a few hundred more years, maybe another vessel will come along and brave the same journey you braved. Maybe their entire crusade against the Radiance will be entirely unnecessary. Maybe you were able to put an end to the infection. But probably not. The strangest thing to me is that the Hollow Knight motif is found in a few different places in this game, and it genuinely makes me wonder if the theme is for the Hollow Knight or for the player. If you're anything like me, you first started playing this game and thought you were the Hollow Knight this whole time. I mean, he looks like a knight, and we don't know what the void is yet, so he looks pretty hollow to me, so what gives? It could really go either way, because at the end of the day, you are likely to be in the same position as the Hollow Knight at some point, and the next poor shade after you will likely end up in the same position as you at some point. This theme might as well be for the few vessels who managed to climb their way out of that dreaded pit and repeat it all again for the rest of eternity. As the soundtrack self-proclaims, this music starts soft, subtle, timid even, with maybe a hint of somberness that you can't quite place your finger on yet. And as you venture further into the depths and unravel more of what's actually taking place around you, the music takes a distinct shift into feeling larger than life and existential at times. Some of the most lush compositions I've ever heard have come from the latter half of this game, and once I actually took time to learn about its show, don't tell approach to the story, I was left with a sense of dread that shockingly only left me wanting to play more, learn more, listen more, and embrace that dreadful feeling. Because I knew that catharsis would always be right around the corner when I needed it to save me from the evil that was hidden in this game's darkest caverns. With such fun compositions like Greenpath and Fungal Wastes that urge me to explore and have fun finding new things, there exist just as many themes that are as intimidating as can be. Themes that discourage me from taking a plunge, but still rewarding me if I can brave the terrifying and unsettling caves. For every song like Dirtmouth that imparts joy into me once I've learned about the silly little guys and gals in this silly little game, there exists its exact opposite. Songs like the Soul Sanctum that make me physically sick to my stomach to imagine such a twisted person meddling with their fellow man. This game is expertly written both in its dialogue to make some of the most lovable characters and in its musical compositions that can tell their own kind of story without you even needing to understand what the game is trying to show you. Sure, you can read about what's essentially slave labor going on in the Crystal Peaks, or you can just listen to the song and feel how lifeless the place is and how meaningless everything is. Sure, you can play the game and read up on the Dreamers and figure out what their whole deal is, or you can listen to the track of the same name and feel how grave of a mistake you're about to make. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. It has truly been a long time since I've played a game with such a gripping story that I actively went out of my way to try and learn everything I could about it. And it's probably been even longer since I've listened to an album, let alone an album I've reviewed, that's kept me coming back to it to try and see how, this one little chord change could affect the entire meaning of the character it's tied to. Or see how this one note could potentially be hinting at a sudden shift in the game's story. And sure, I might just be overanalyzing some of this, but hey, that's kind of what you guys come to me for. And I've even had a few of you tell me openly that what I've said has been written in such a good way to elicit an emotional response, even to the point of crying sometimes. So I think I'm doing a pretty good job at this overanalyzing thing. I'll admit, if I had never even bothered to play this game, I would have just never assumed the game could have potentially gotten even 10% as deep as I've attempted to make it sound in this video, because it's also just generally excellently composed music that fits exactly where it belongs. I have almost all of the songs in this game on my background music playlist, and if that's all you get out of it, then that's fine. But the fact that I've been able to get upwards of 17, 18 plus pages written on almost exclusively just the ties that it may have within the game certainly has to say something about the way that it was put together and the circumstances that can influence the way we perceive the music for our entire lives. My one piece of advice to viewers of this video is to just play the game and listen to it as it was intended to be listened to. As I mentioned before, there's little flourishes that will change all the time as you explore around. There's a certain sense of magic that comes with listening to this music while you explore the kingdom of Hallownest and hearing it change and evolve as you immerse yourself deeper. I guess ultimately what I'm trying to say is that Hollow Knight is an 8-year-old game, which is fairly old by some standards, and me finally jumping onto it only 6-7 months ago means that almost everything that I have said has certainly already been said a couple hundred times each. But I truly mean it when I say that this music will come back around and it will end up in the greats of video game music history. That includes the Gods and Nightmares DLC, and that especially includes Silk Song. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here.